Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm doing the sky this month, with the month being a little bit asterisk from today through to November the 6th, because November the 7th, I believe we have our next Recreational Astronomy Night, and someone else will be doing it. So the first thing I have to say, and this is a personal experience, so it kind of goes in with the whole what did you experience? I was up at the CAO, and I'd planned that for a long time, took the time off because it's new moon time. And I was out puttering around Monday, which is Thanksgiving Day, in the evening. It was getting dark, and I was setting up my telescope, and I thought, gee, I'm seeing a lot of meteors. Eventually, I pulled out my zero-gravity chair. This is like at 7:45 p.m. It's not even completely dark. And yeah, there are meteors going off like every minute more frequently. And I traced back the radian, and it was somewhere to the north, and I went, that's interesting. I looked in the Observer's Handbook, and they have no meteor showers listed. I thought it was those camelopardalis that we all chased about. Where's Ron? We went and tried to catch a camelopardalis, but as it turns out, they were the draconids, and they had an outburst. But a lot of places, when I went and checked afterwards, they said, we don't really expect very much. They're kind of a boring meteor shower. I don't know what the moral of this story is, other than keep looking up, and the sky this month will never cover everything. They won't really alert you to everything possible, and sometimes things are unexpected. So the more you look up, the more you probably are going to see. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach this month, and there's reasons why I'm doing it. And I'm going, what does the sky do in a month in the big picture? So for a month, we have a full cycle of the moon. That's where the word month comes from. So it starts with a new moon, which is very close to the sun on either side. We have first quarter, which will be high in the sky at sunset, and it sets around midnight or in that area, and that kind of moves around a little bit, but in the middle of the night. We have a full moon, which is basically opposite the sun. It rises when the sun sets, and it sets when the sun rises, so it's in the sky all night. And if you want to see something other than the moon, well, you're going to be out of luck. And then the third quarter rises, in the middle of the night, and it's high in the sky when the sun comes up. And one of the frustrations that I have, and I say this to graphic designers or writers of books, the moon doesn't work that way. When they say, oh, the thin crescent moon was rising in the east as the sun set. No. Or you see pictures of a crescent moon with the lit part upwards in the night sky. So where's the sun? Because the sun... Anyway, so this is one of my peeves, and it does throw me out because the moon does definite things, and it affects us pretty much. Where in the cycle, it kind of depends on the sky this month, because we can start in the middle of the cycle, but it always repeats the cycle. And we'll see where it is in the cycle for this particular month. So stars, that's those constellations and all the deep space items that we look at. Every day the stars rise, they're at their highest, and they set 4 minutes earlier. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, and you might not notice a 4-minute difference, but over 15 days, 15 times 4 is 60, and that's a whole hour. So it rises an hour earlier and set an hour later. And in a whole month, which is 30 days, let's call it, it's 2 hours, and that's a big difference. So something that might have been still an hour, like it's still up in the sky an hour after darkness, may already have set for an hour when it becomes dark. So you lose things, but you gain things in the morning sky that come up earlier and earlier, so they're higher in the sky. So stars, for instance, stars that set an hour after darkness at the start of the month will set an hour before darkness at the end of the month, i.e. they will be gone from view, everything being equal. But in the fall, and this is why I'm kind of doing this, is not everything is equal. So the days are also getting shorter. So yeah, the stars are setting 4 minutes earlier, but nightfall is coming a little bit earlier, and it's about a minute to a minute and a half kind of on average on each side. So darkness is coming minute or a minute and a half earlier in the evening, and it's coming and it's ending a minute or a minute and a half later in the morning. So what this means is that our summer stars, they're still going away. They're going to go away, but they're not going away as quickly as you'd expect. So this is a good time to kind of catch Sagittarius because it's lingering a little bit. You can go out a little bit earlier night after night, and you can kind of catch it before it's completely out of view. So I'm going to just show you what happens in stellarium, and I'll also show you kind of what is. So right now, what I have it set at, so this is today, I believe, October the 10th. And I've set it for 8:30, which is a good time. I mean, basically, it's dark by 8:30, and certainly because night is coming earlier, it will be equally dark all the way through the month. So I'm going to just run time forward a little bit. You can see how the stars are changing a little bit, but look at that over there. So even though Sagittarius is kind of hanging in there, we've got the moon coming through. Now that isn't, it looks like a full moon. We'd have to zoom in to see it. It's basically a crescent moon. Sorry, was it not doing what I said it was doing? It looked perfectly good on the screen. I'm okay. All right, so suddenly the moon shows up, and this is by the 14th. So I'm going to just back out. So here's today. And you got Saturn sitting there. Let me just move this out of the way, and you can see the teapot of Sagittarius there. You can see the summer Milky Way. It's still up there. You can go out there this evening and catch it for a little bit, because you won't see it for quite a few months afterwards. But what happens is the moon is basically starting to come up, and the moon is going to stomp all over our viewing right through the middle of this period, zipping past Mars, and it just keeps, it's still in the sky. If I move over here, it's in the sky all the way through. Now we're on the 29th, so we're actually approaching Halloween. It's disappeared, but it's disappeared at 8 p.m., but it still comes up at 9 p.m., so you're kind of stuck with the moon. But I'm going to try to deal with that. This makes this period actually a little bit challenging. So avoiding the moon. How can you avoid the moon in this period? For the next few days, you can easily observe after the moon is set, because the moon sets pretty early. For instance, it sets at about 10:30 on Sunday night, October the 14th. But it just keeps setting an hour later, roughly, every night. So it's going to get harder and harder unless you really want to stay up late or get up really early, have a nap beforehand. By the 21st of this month, moon set is at 4:09 a.m., which means it's basically up all night. And you will have to wait until the 29th, which is almost the end of this period. We're getting close to Halloween, to get a bit of observing before moonrise. And even then, the moon comes up in kind of a, I guess it'd be waning gibbous phase at 10:25 p.m. So you've got a couple of hours, and at 10:25, the moon is up, and that's it. So the other thing that we have in this time period, and this kind of surprised me because I thought it was in January, we have the latest sunrises and the latest end of astronomical twilight, or beginning of astronomical twilight, because basically daylight savings time has been extended so long. So as soon as we go on to standard time, this is no longer the case. This is only because we have daylight savings time that runs pretty late. So on Saturday, November the 3rd, which is the last day before we switch to daylight savings time, astronomical twilight begins at 6:18. So at 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. on that morning, it is still perfectly dark, and it's perfectly dark for another 18 minutes. And the sun will only rise at 7:55 a.m. And I think the latest sunrise kind of early in January is 7:52 maybe. So this is actually the latest sunrise that you're going to get, but then after that you get to sleep in. But during that time you could say, fine, we're going to get up early, but the moon is in its last quarter phase, so it's sitting in the morning sky. So I figured that if only the moon was a half cycle off it, we were about, third quarter right now, we could observe Sagittarius in the evening and have a nice look at all those summer constellations that are going away. And then, we get new moon, we get to view whatever we want. And then towards the end of the month, we'll have the moon in the evening, but we can get up early in the morning and see a moonless sky with the winter stars. But it just doesn't work out this year. So just to recap the moon dates, the new moon was basically 2 days ago. First quarter is October the 16th. Full moon, which is called the Hunter's Moon and various other moons in different cultures' mythology, is October 24th. Third quarter is October 31st. And new moon is on November the 7th, which is just past this sky this month. So next month is pretty much the same deal. It starts with the new moon, and immediately you've got to work around the moon. Well, what about the planets? If the moon's around, the planets are still visible or can be viewed. Well, Venus is too close to the sun, so it's spent a long time in the evening and it's basically gone. It'll reappear in the morning. Jupiter, it's still above the horizon as it gets dark, but it's not very high above the horizon, so it's not really a great observing target. I'm sure there'll be lots of distortion. You can take a look at it first thing in observing, but it's not going to be ideal. Saturn is also well to the west, and it's also kind of approaching its end in the evening twilight, but it's still fairly high up, and it's going to be a good observing target right through the end of this month. So for the whole period, Saturn's okay, but you have to get it right after dark when it's the highest up, because it'll just keep getting lower and lower and set fairly early. So M&M. Mars continues to dominate the southern sky. There's no question. You go out there. I've had people at work say, "What's that bright thing I saw in the south?" Because I have this reputation as an astrologer or something. It's getting fainter, but there's... Yeah, we've had this discussion too. It's getting fainter, but there's nothing that competes with it in the sky. It really stands out. Personally, like I've looked at it with my telescope, I've looked at it with the CAO's larger telescope, and it's okay. I find the most striking thing is just seeing that red orb or orange orb just sitting low in the sky, and it just goes low right across the sky. And I can understand why the Greeks and the Romans thought it was the god of war, and it looks ominous to me, but also very impressive. So even if you just have a chance to pop out for 5 minutes, even from the city, you can see Mars. Mercury, my favorite, okay. So Mars is really impressive. Mercury this time is not very impressive. And it starts an apparition, which is an appearance in the evening sky, but it's not a very good one. In fact, it's a tough one, which I will demonstrate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to go find Mercury. Oops. I typed it right. That would work better. Well, that's not too promising. What time exactly? It's 9:30. So the other thing I have to do, and you'll see the reason why, is I have to go in here, and this lovely this lovely landscape that we have by default, I have to change it to ocean. So that's also not good news, because the trees aren't really very high. So you can see right now there's the sun, and Mercury's kind of hanging out there. That's not so good. I'm going to make it maybe 1830. And it's there, but you can't see it. Basically, what I look for when I go through and say how visible is Mercury or anything, I look at the size of the dot, because Stellarium actually adjusts the size of that dot for you depending on how bright the object is and also how much atmosphere it goes through, so it will show you the extinction as well. So basically, if you see a nice fat dot, it means, yeah, probably are going to see it, and if it shows a small dot, it's going to be harder to see, and if it shows no dot, well, yeah, that's not too good. So I'm going to just step time forward. Actually, I'm going to step it up a little bit too. I noticed that we're in towards the end of the month. Well, it has to be the end of the month. So this is the 23rd, as you can see here, of October. It's sitting below Jupiter. Now, can we make it visible as a dot? You can see how Jupiter suddenly pops out. And that is Stellarium saying now it's probably going to be visible as the sun fades. So it's actually quite... Mercury doesn't, so let's go forward a day. You can see Mercury's got a little bit of a dot there now. It passes, but that's easier to read. It's half a degree above the horizon, which is not very helpful. And if we run time back, well, maybe you'll be able to see it on the 27th, right below Jupiter. If you can see Jupiter, at least that's a good guide point. But I like it a little bit more like this, where it's on the same level as Jupiter, because we can run the time backwards a little bit, and it's a little bit higher in the sky, and so is the dot. But it's tough. This is going to be a tough apparition. I'm going to try. Will I succeed? That's a good question. As you can see, it kind of just zips along the horizon rather than climbing higher in the sky, and then it just goes away. Well, that's the way it goes. So difficult.
Do you have a good southern sky that you can...
I've got an easy one for mornings. It's easy. I've got a great sky, but in evenings, no, I don't. And I've actually had people accuse me of doing questionable things with binoculars when I've been trying. So it wasn't that funny at the time, actually. But his use of the terminology that he was accusing me of was a little bit off too. Okay, so U and N, United Nations. Well, it's Neptune and Uranus or Uranus. Neptune is well placed. It's close to opposition, but honestly, it doesn't make any difference with these distant planets. They're about the same distance all the time. Our little puny orbit hardly affects our view of them. And Uranus rises before midnight, and Neptune is up a fair amount in the southeast once it gets dark. They aren't a great view in themselves, in my opinion, and I've seen Neptune in our big scope in the CAO, and it's kind of like, so true story, we didn't have quite the auto go-to set up quite calibrated properly, so we said, go to Neptune, and it wasn't quite in the field of view. We're bumping around the telescope and going, is that Neptune? Is that Neptune? And this is with a large telescope and a good eyepiece at high magnification. So it's not that interesting to look at itself, but I find looking for the moons, and I've done that at the CAO a couple of times, is really interesting because they've got moons that are like almost at the edge of visibility. So it's a real challenge, and Stellarium, again, my favorite program, helps you, and I'm going to just show you. The other thing I have to say is you can see them with binoculars, and in fact, the other night, these are cheap binoculars. These are the Canadian Tire $50 special whatever binoculars, so nothing fancy. And I saw both Uranus and Neptune in those last night just by going through the Stellarium, and I'm going to show you how that works, because this is one of those interesting tips I hope that people will find useful. So I'm going to switch to Stellarium. Okay, so I'm going to just put it to I'm going to put it to yesterday, because that's when I viewed it, and I'll show you how I viewed it and what will happen over time. So that was yesterday, and obviously I viewed it at, let's say, about 9:30. That sounds pretty good. So Mars, is, like I say, is still dominating in the sky. Where is Neptune? Neptune is somewhere. There it is. So, like, how do I do this in binoculars? And I thought binoculars was a lot easier than telescope. Here's how it worked. So I was just looking out, and these three little stars there, like I noticed them in the sky, and what that's interesting is that part of Aquarius, which it is. And I thought, and then it showed this Neptune there, and I thought, well, if I can see those stars, can I use them to kind of guide me over to Neptune? And in fact, that's the case. So if we go up, you see these, like that's the water jar, these three stars. One thing I'll say about Stellarium is they compress the star brightness. Stars vary in brightness incredibly. Asterius is like 10,000 times brighter than the dimmest star this program shows. They can't make the dots that big, so everything's a little bit compressed. So I will assure you that this in a reasonably dark sky definitely stands out. And, sorry, the little squiggle stands out. Sorry, this little squiggle, I'm getting a little lost. So what I said was, okay, from that little squiggle, if I go up and across, and from there I kind of go down, there's a bright star here, and Neptune is basically in between. So sure enough, I basically just set my binoculars there, went across there, And what you can see here is there's this nice little box pattern, and that is perfectly obvious in binoculars. So the other interesting thing is Neptune, and you can see the magnitude. So we have to look up here because it's really hard to read down there. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Magnitude 7.83. This is a 6 magnitude star, 6 something, 7.45, so that Neptune's still dimmer than that, but that's about the same brightness as Neptune. I looked at it and said, yep, that it is. The interesting thing, the first interesting thing is that if we center on it, if then we do the same thing over a few days, you can see how it moves, so that pattern will keep changing. But you should still be able to pick it up in binoculars, especially if you found it once. Practice makes perfect, works great. And this took me like 10 minutes to do, because once I realized that I had some guideposts to it, I think with a telescope it's actually harder unless your go-to is working really well, because you have to star hop and your field of view is small. With the binoculars, it's a big field of view. So I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to go over to, sorry, I'm going to turn on the constellation patterns and names just a little bit, because I had to use, oh, we really zoomed in there. So for Uranus, I actually used these 3 stars in Aries. They're pretty distinctive too. They make a little bow or arc. And these aren't very bright stars, but I could still kind of say, okay, go to the arc and go close to this star, but just a little bit off to the left. And in this case, Uranus is actually part of a little pattern. Sorry, it doesn't look the same way that I, oh, that, okay. Let's center on it. So there, I saw this little angle, and then the straight line, and again, I could match the magnitudes. I'm not going to do it for this one, but say, yeah, that for sure is Uranus. And there it is. And again, if you can go back over time. Hello, please center. Again, you'd be able to go back and watch it, like with just binoculars, you can see the motion. You don't need anything really fancy. You don't need to do astroimaging. The other thing, though, if you do have a big telescope, and it doesn't have to be the CAO, but the CAO is a great place for this, is if we zoom in, Uranus has got this menagerie of moons, and they're all very faint. So they are at the limits, in my opinion, at the limits of visibility. It depends on the night. It depends on how high it up. Like the planet itself is not very interesting, but trying to pick off those moons is quite nifty. And I think I've seen, Miranda, and then we have a discussion, is that Ariel or is that some other moon? And Stellarium does give you a live view of what the moon layout is. And that's a lot of fun too. Like, I find it a very interesting challenge. With Neptune, it's not so good because Triton is the only moon you can see, and all the rest of the moons are really, really faint. But you can't see Triton. Uranus is a little bit more interesting for its moons, in my opinion. So that is it. Meteor showers, well, gee, never say never, I guess, is the lesson I learned. There are the Orionids, which are from October, on the night of October 21st, 22nd, but the moon is pretty much in the way. And the Taurids are November the 5th, and both are not really supposed to be really exciting and meteor showers, and I haven't read any speculation that there could be an outburst. To be honest, a few places, like in the last week, said, there could be an outburst of the draconids, people should watch out for it, but probably not. I haven't seen any indication of this, but like I say, you never know, and you could be treated to a meteor shower, and that's always a nice thing. Okay, so there's some dim stars to the south, and I just want to kind of cover some constellations. I've got a bit of time, right? Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to flip over. So we zoom way back out. We don't really want this anymore. So these are the southern constellations, and the only patterns that I can really recognize in Aquarius and Pisces. In Aquarius, I can recognize this water jug, which is not laid out like that at all in this line art, which is pretty default. But this is really distinctive. It does stand out. And for Pisces, there's a circlet here. And again, that does reasonably stand out. And there's one bright star in the southern sky, which is Fomalhaut, and the rest of the constellation you probably won't see. It actually looks not too bad in the southern sky, which I've had the opportunity to see. But compared to Mars, it's not that bright, but it's still the only bright star down there. And the constellation that I kind of learned, and this was actually back in September when I was up at the CAO and I got up like at 3 o'clock in the morning, is Cetus, which is probably not a very useful constellation. It has two stars that are decently bright. That star is the second magnitude, so you probably can see it if you're someplace dark but not really dark. It has another bright star here. And that one is those are probably the only two stars that are visible from anywhere close to Toronto, but if you get out, you can see this pattern, and you can see the head, which kind of resembles the circlet of Pisces, but it's further down. But just looking at that shape, that doesn't look like a sea, like a whale to me. It looks like a rubber ducky, so I'm calling it the rubber ducky constellation. And you probably, if you go out there and you learn it, you will not forget it, because it kind of floats across the sky. I guess, yeah, it kind of floats backwards across the sky during the fall skies. The head is that way, that's right. So it's going something backwards. Yes?
So City Office where Khan Noonien Singh was.
So we have that. Let's see how. So the M30s, and the last thing, hopefully I have time for this, is to do the M30s, which is M31, M32, and M33. And this is kind of interesting. Most people, so I'm going to pop over to Stellarium. So the way I think lots of people know how to find Andromeda, you find the great square of Pegasus, which is actually a great rectangle of Pegasus, but no one wants to call it that. But from where we are, always in the left side when you're looking at it, and the upper left corner, there's Andromeda. In fact, this star is shared between Andromeda and Pegasus, and there are these quite bright stars going out that way, and you go up from the second one, you go up 3 short steps, and you can already see the fuzz there. There's M31. Excellent. Most people know how to find it. M32, like how many people go out and view M32? Yay, guy. And M32 is somewhere underneath. I guess that's M32. Yep. Honestly, when I look at it with a telescope that may be the size of Messier used, I go, it just looks like a fuzzy star to me. So he must have been using a lot of magnification and looking very carefully to say, that is a fuzzy, and I'm going to put it in my catalog. Compared to M31, it's like a huge difference, and it's quite amusing. Now, M33, which is a galaxy in Triangulum, I have heard is the most distant object you may be able to see with your unaided eyes. But how do you find Triangulum, and how do you find the galaxy? And I realized I actually didn't know, like, Triangulum, who cares about that? It's like 3 dim stars, and they said, well, yeah, it can be a triangle. The way I think about it, though, and the way it works for me is, remember I did this business with these 3 stars, and then there's Andromeda kind of up. M33 in Triangulum is kind of the opposite of M31. So it's kind of up there. If you go down there, and you go in about here somewhere around here. Oops, did I miss it? Up. There we go. So I'm going to tag it. Oops, type star. Sometimes Stellarium has problems picking stuff out. It's over there. Yeah, it's not doing the name for me. If I turn on deep sky objects, there's a million of them. So it's basically from this middle star from which you go up to see the Andromeda Galaxy, you go down to see M33. I'm not sure that I've seen it in dark skies. You need really dark, really clear skies, and it has to be high up. I used those binoculars, and I'm going, is that it? Is that it? It is actually very big, but it's also very diffuse and faint. So eventually I'm going, yeah, there's a big, really faint patch, and that is M33. So if I can barely see it in binoculars, I'm not going to see it with the eyes, and it was kind of humid. But it's another one that is worth trying if you're ever out and it's a cold, clear, crisp night. And later in the year, it's even better because it's higher in the sky. So that's one that I recommend that you try to look for. In a telescope, I don't know, in a small telescope, it's probably just a large, very faint fuzz. But astro imagers should have lots of fun with it. So the other thing you can do is you can get up early. Like I say, the latest sunrises are coming up at the end of this month. I got up at the CAO at 5:30 this morning. I just kind of woke up. Didn't make a late night of it because the clouds were coming in and the lightning was flashing. I went outside and there was Orion right up front and Lepus the rabbit, I guess, beneath it. And I could saw the path of stars of Eridanus there. It was a very impressive view just from the balcony. I didn't really want to set up because it was 5:30 and it was going to be getting light. But you can get a great preview of the winter stars and even some of the spring constellations. Leo, which is a spring constellation, is already on its way up as it starts to get light. I'm going to skip the stellarium, but like I say, if you go out there at 5:30 in the morning, it'll be dark. Towards, like for the last half of this month, it is still astronomically dark at 6 a.m. Astronomical twilight only begins about 6:02, and then it creeps to 6:04 and 6:05 and 6:06. It will be dark at 6 a.m., and 6 a.m. is not outrageously early. I'm at my desk at the city at 6:30, so that's my take on that. Finest deep sky objects. I have this old booklet that was published, and I'm missing the cover. I've had this for ages, and I think they have 50 in them. They have 105. Wow. So I actually used it for the first time seriously last night. And 19 Piscium has a very red color, it says. And I kind of looked and said, yeah, it's a red star. Eta Cassiopeia is a nice double star, but it took higher power to actually resolve. Gamma Andromeda, it's like another Albireo. And I had this discussion with Blake. Usually when there's a contrasting color and one star is brighter than other, the brighter star is the redder one and the fainter star is the bluer one. I think that is because evolution, stellar evolution, means if you need a really bright star, it will have moved to the supergiant phase, and the blue star is still pretty bright. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know that anyone surveyed it and done this survey saying, well, all the colorful doubles, the brighter one is almost always the yellower or redder. But it is like Albireo on both of those. The bright star is kind of yellowish, and the dimmer star is greenish or bluish, depending on your impression. Delta Cepheus is a very easy wide double, and it's a prototype Cepheid. Gamma Ariatis, I think I saw that, but the clouds were coming in, so I kind of gave up. But these are according to these people, some of the finest deep sky objects, and I'm going, well, that's interesting. How much time do we have, or we don't? We don't. Okay. So, this stuff will go up somewhere, I'm sure, and it's live broadcast, so you can take a look at it. Actually, because I have just 1 second here, I will show you this very red star because it's easy to find. Oops, we'll zoom out. Remember that circlet in Pisces that I said is pretty obvious? 19 Piscium, I think you can already see it. According to Stellarium, it's quite red. It's got a blue minus B. It's got a color index of 2.52, which is quite red. So even in binoculars, I point them up there, and yeah, I can see it's a red star. Whether it's the finest object of its kind in the sky, I don't know, but actually I'll finish the presentation on that note. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Hopefully I can answer them.
I don't know if you or thank you. I don't know if you or anybody else knows. Are the dust storms in Mars over, or is it still hard to see anything? I haven't looked at Mars recently, but I think it's still closer than some of the oppositions that come in 4 or 5 years.
It's still pretty close, and as far as I can tell, and I have seen details on Mars. So yeah, I think it's fading out. Whether it's completely faded out, I'm not sure. To be honest, I found looking at it with a telescope, even from the CAO, a little bit disappointing. It could have been because of dust storms, though. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.